Former Presidents Obama and George W. Bush and U2's Bono are saying goodbye to USAID. The unlikely trio teamed up via teleconference Monday to talk to employees on USAID's last day of operations. And the former presidents, in a rare move, rebuked Trump's decision to shutter the agency.
It all comes as Secretary of State Marco Rubio officially announced yesterday that the foreign aid arm has ceased operations. The agency experienced a rapid dismantling since President Trump's return to the White House, and massively in part thanks to the help of DOJ. Rubio writes on X, "The era of government-sanctioned inefficiency is over. From now on, our foreign assistance programs will be accountable to the American taxpayer."
The shuttering of USAID is expected to lead to the deaths of millions around the world, according to a recent Time article. Former US Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, says, quote, "The destruction of USAID will go down in history as one of America's most significant foreign policy mistakes. We have no chance of competing with the Communist Party of China without instruments of influence like USAID. Hope our next president reverses this decision quickly." So you graciously let me rant about the Paramount decision earlier on. I'm sure that this will be the other topic we perhaps disagree fairly vigorously on, but why don't you tell me why you support this or whatever?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing to understand is that this is not a complete shuttering of all of the programs that USAID administers. They've cut about 80% of them, and the remaining 20%, most of which are these direct aid programs that are being cited as potentially leading to loss of life, are being re-administered under the purview of the State Department. The concern was that USAID was operating too independently, was not accountable to the taxpayer, which led to NGOs basically operating as slush funds for members of the administration who were unelected bureaucrats. So they want it directly under the State Department so that Marco Rubio, or whoever the Secretary of State is, has more direct purview. But I think broadly, a lot of people's concerns about USAID is that the so-called soft power mechanism is not just feeding hungry people in Africa, but also engaging in a lot of quite nefarious and pernicious campaigns to help orchestrate division in other countries. Dropsite News, or excuse me, Gray Zone News did an interesting release on a set of documents about a USAID-backed, effectively, coup in Bangladesh, where USAID and the State Department, by extension, had identified that the Bangladeshi Prime Minister was not friendly to the idea of the US building a military base in Bangladesh. Instead of trying to convince her or offering her something in return, they decided that she needed to be removed. USAID found out that there was an active group of LGBTQ plus activists in Bangladesh who also really liked rap music. So they spent American taxpayer money creating anti-government rap songs targeted towards LGBTQ individuals in Bangladesh for the purpose of overthrowing that regime. I think most sane people would agree that that's not a judicious use of our taxpayer dollars, and also not the best way that we should be conducting foreign policy. And that's not the type of soft power that I want to see America engaging in. So I've already ranted long enough. I have plenty more to say, but I will let you respond.
So you used the word judicious there, and I think that that is important both in terms of spending, but also in terms of cutting. Now, the instance that you cited in Bangladesh is not one that I'm familiar with the specifics of. I take the point that USAID is involved, or has previously been involved, in things that are under the rubric of governance and democracy. And those things can, I think, be useful and can also be shady and can be about political interference. Where I have the problem with the lack of judiciousness in the cutting, though, is, remember, the total USAID budget is about $40 billion. So it's about 1/3 of 1% of the federal budget. And there is plainly money spent there that is being very well spent and is projected not to survive in many of these instances. Now, we cited one of the other examples of the Time report forecasting millions of deaths and all of that. I don't know exactly how that projection was arrived at. But let me just read from the Washington Post this past weekend, who were in Sudan. And they spoke to a dozen more than 24 Washington Post interviews with civilians, clinicians, and aid officials in the capital, Khartoum, and surrounding villages. And they found that while the Trump administration's cuts to USAID have been felt across the world, their impact in Sudan was especially deadly. When US-supported soup kitchens were forced to close, babies starved quietly, their mother said, while other siblings died begging for food. Funding stoppages meant that critical medical supplies were never delivered, doctors said. The lack of US-funded disease response teams has made it harder to contain cholera outbreaks, which are already claiming the lives of those weakened by hunger. Even in addition to that, we had the sweeping axing of all the money that was so sudden that actually food aid was trapped at ports and things, rotting there, doing nobody any good, because there was, in my view, far too crude an approach to it.
I agree it could have been executed better, but I also think that there has to be a limiting principle on what exactly around the world the United States is responsible for, and to what extent does USAID handouts actually prevent countries from becoming self-sufficient. One of the things that Marco Rubio cited in his Substack about the ending of the USAID program as we currently conceive of it is that countries that he has been talking to about this don't want constant aid. They want trade relations. They want the ability to export and import goods. They want the ability to have economic development. And he pointed out in response to Michael Maffal's China point, saying we were ceding the ground to China, he points out that after more than $89 billion invested in the Middle East and North Africa, the U.S. still has lower favorability ratings than China in every nation but Morocco. So if this is supposed to be the soft power regime that is increasing the U.S.'s standing around the world, why aren't we seeing results?
I think that's a logical fallacy, but I'm told we're out of time. So we'll return to logical fallacies some other time.
We can always talk about it tomorrow. That's going to do it for us on Rising Live.
Conservatives Tucker Carlson and Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene had some rare praise for socialist New York City mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani. Let's watch.
That guy was the only person in the New York City mayor's debate to say he wanted to focus on New York City. All the candidates were asked, if you could visit a foreign country, what would it be? And they, of course, all had an answer. I think most said Israel. Great. And he said, I wouldn't go anywhere. I'd stay in New York. And like, if I want to meet Jewish constituents, I'd go to their synagogues, their homes or whatever, but I'd be here in New York because that's what I'm doing. I'm running New York. That's my job.
Well, he gave the right answer.
He gave the right answer.
Both clarified that they do not support Mamdani's policy ambitions, but did say he's the only Democratic candidate connecting with voters and issues specific to New York.
As a reminder, Zohran Mamdani stunned political observers last week after his victory against former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo in the Democratic mayoral primary. He's also come under fire by critics for proposing to raise property taxes on wealthy, majority-white neighborhoods, and now he's doubling down on defending his comments that billionaires shouldn't exist. Despite that, he's being heralded as a rising star that has the ability to create a political earthquake in New York and across the country, according to the recent New York Magazine piece.
Social media users sounded off about Carlson's and Marjorie Taylor Greene's comments, with far-right internet personality Laura Loomer writing, "For all of the grifters like Rep. MTG and Tucker Carlson who claim Zohran Mamdani won his election because he is America First, that is a blatant lie. He spent his entire campaign and has spent his entire political career talking about Gaza."
Chief editor of the Middle East Forum, Jim Hansen, writes, "Reality check, lots of people saying Tucker Carlson and MTG praise Zohran Mamdani. Unfair. They pointed out that he won by focusing on issues people cared about, and both of them slagged him while doing so."
This is honestly not super surprising to me to hear this take from Tucker and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Actually, that debate moment was something that I've consistently praised on this show because I thought it was an important sort of America First moment. If you're the mayor of New York City, why the heck do you care about traveling to a foreign country to advocate for those interests? You're not making foreign policy. You're making policy for the people of New York City. That should be your primary focus. Now, there's probably very little else that I agree with Mamdani on policy-wise, but I did think that that moment was pitch perfect. And for the people who are a bit more non-interventionists like Tucker and Marjorie Taylor Greene, I can see why that resonated.
Yeah, I think the context here is that Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson, they're really trying to voice their discontent with Trump as it relates to Iran.
Yeah.
And now this New York story is a huge story, and we'll talk about Mamdani in a second here more. But he really did focus on New York when there was a lot of pressure in the media and other aspects to be talking more about Israel, and I think they are voicing their opinion on that. Now, the other important dynamic here is that populism does create interesting bedfellows, and Mamdani really is a populist, and as is, I think, Tucker Carlson, his latest incarnation is sort of a conservative populist as well, and there actually are genuine areas of agreement and common ground there. Now, what's also happening with Mamdani is he is a massive rising star now in the Democratic Party. This is a huge political upset to take on the Cuomo political dynasty in New York and win. And, I've been looking at Democratic rising stars for 20 years now, and I would say that Mamdani is a rare political talent. He has an ability to both present well, and he's achieved something that very few politicians are able to, despite many wanting to, which is legitimately carrying the mantle of the happy warrior. And he's directly speaking to working class people. He's had the political skills in that debate, as you're referencing, to say, hey, actually I want to stay here in New York City and not travel to other countries. And he gets that. I mean, in some ways, this is, there's an America first on the right. This is New York City first that he's been embracing, and that definitely caught fire. He was massively outspent. And at the same time, he built this incredible grassroots army of volunteers. He's absolutely going to be a factor moving forward.
Yeah, I think so too. He's obviously a very charismatic guy. The ads that he ran were very well done. And I've talked to people who are pretty high up in conservative political world who are like, yeah, he's a great candidate. He's a really good politician. And, he could be a real concern for the Republicans, depending on what happens in New York, right? There's always the possibility of Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo teaming up to try to take him out together, but the general consensus is that he would probably win the general election. And then there's basically, from my perspective, two things that could happen.
Yeah.
Well, I'll be fair and I'll say three things that could happen. One is that he's not able to accomplish a lot of the things he wants to do. Maybe he doesn't have the power to do it, or he can't get everyone in New York City to go along with him, and things just kind of stay the same that they are now, and he's kind of fades away. Or he could implement all of these things that he's promised on the campaign trail, and it could be a total effing disaster in New York, goes into the dumpster, and there goes his political career. Or the third one, which is I think is the least likely, is that he implements all of these policies and everything's wonderful and New York's great again.
And that's what's so different about this situation compared to the rise of AOC and the breakthrough of Bernie Sanders in 2016. Obviously, all of them have carved out a common political space. But the difference is Zohran Mamdani is running to be in a position of real authority, of real governing authority. That's not something that AOC and Bernie have really had to contend with. They've been able to be in the House of Representatives and in the Senate as sort of like a voice. AOC has, love her or hate her, she's not been a legislative workhorse. And as a result, you can sort of, cast out your positions and sort of stake political ground on things. But Mamdani, if he wins, he has a massive governing responsibility in the city of New York. It'll be the first time that this movement has had an opportunity to actually implement their ideas, and then we'll see what happens. Because I think that Mamdani, being such an insurgent, has attracted millions of dollars of opposition advertising that has painted him as this sort of total extremist wacko kind of guy. But if you really pay attention to him and go straight to the source material, as Elon likes to say, hear directly from him, you find that he's actually a pretty thoughtful guy. He is a bridge builder, someone who wants to hear from people of different perspectives. He's open to having healthy disagreement, and he's even open to compromise. So as a governing philosophy, I think that it'll be really interesting to see how he leads. He's definitely articulated this progressive vision, and can he bring people together as New York City mayor? If he does that, he will absolutely be a rising star. He might even be a 2028 contender.
I think that is the big question as to whether or not he can unite people, because he's had two fumbles on that part so far. One with the Intifada comments, which he sort of tried to walk back but not fully, and then the comments about taxing wealthy white neighborhoods more than minority neighborhoods. And it's like, why did you bring race into that? If you just want to tax the billionaires, just say that.
Yeah. I mean, I think now when he's asked about it, he tries to, I think, appear more reasonable, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know if that genie can go back in the bottle, though.
Yeah, and I think, look, that kind of rhetoric is not helpful, and I think, it's what I would love to see in American politics generally, especially on the Democratic side, is someone who has the dynamism and the charisma of a Mamdani and a let's bring people together pragmatic view of governing, because you do need to deliver, and I think the American people want that more than ever. And so I don't agree with the government taking over grocery stores, for example, right. Which is some of the stuff that he advocates for. But at the same time, knowing people in his orbit, he's an extremely smart guy. I have friends who served the New York State legislature with him. This guy's the real deal. And people, and if he wins, it'll be a game changer.
We will see what happens. Color me skeptical.
All right, well, next up, the UN nuclear watchdog is calling Trump's bluff on damages to Iran's nuclear program. We'll discuss that next.
I guess that's the concept. This is not a nice business. We're going to teach them how to run away from an alligator, okay? If they escape prison. How to run away. Don't run in a straight line. Run like this. And you know what? Your chances go up about 1%.
President Trump insinuating there that his new immigration detention facility in the Florida Everglades, dubbed Alligator Alcatraz, is meant to be inhospitable, apparently telling a reporter who asked if potential escapees would be eaten by an alligator, quote, "I guess that's the concept." President Trump also seemingly trolling the future residents by giving advice on how to run away from an alligator. All of that before taking a tour of the facility for its grand opening on Tuesday. It's built to hold hundreds of detainees while they await deportation.
The facility's grand opening was heralded by the right, with the Florida GOP even selling Alligator Alcatraz merch. Take a look at this video from conservative podcaster Benny Johnson, who was invited along for the tour. Republicans are also encouraging governors to open similar sites in their states. Take a listen.
Of a red state, and if you're watching tonight, pick up the phone, call DHS, work with us to build facilities in your state so that we can get the illegals out, we can get the criminals out.
We reach out to other states, Stephen, and a lot of them are open to helping. Alaska told us that we don't have alligators, but we have lots of bears. However, they aren't aware of any plans for an Alaska version of bear. I said bear Alcatraz.
Meanwhile, some on the left are going so far as to draw comparisons to Nazi concentration camps, with some renaming the project Alligator Auschwitz. I find the humour in this difficult to locate, I have to say. Now, comparing it to, like, Auschwitz, I think that's another example of sort of degradation of our general debate. I don't think it is comparable to Auschwitz. But I don't like the tendency we seem to be exhibiting increasingly to sort of adopt the language of trolling or of Twitter dunks to things that are serious policy matters. And we saw some of the merch there. I guess it was Benny Johnson showing it off. But even among people in government, you have those photos of, like, the alligators with the ice caps on, all of that. Or Laura Ingraham chuckling along with Stephen Miller about, well, maybe Alaska can set bears on people rather than alligators. I am not on the immigration question at the most liberal end of the spectrum. I think if people come to this country illegally and get caught, there are obvious consequences to that. But I don't like the kind of glee and contempt that I think is reflected in some of this stuff. To people who, yes, they may be in the country without authorization, the majority of them having done what millions and millions of people in the history of this country have done, which is try to come here to create a better life for themselves, often working poorly paid jobs, getting paid under the table, etc. That does not mean I am in favor of illegal immigration, but it does mean that I'm against that kind of contemptuous, seeming to dehumanize people, in my view.
I think this reaction stems from what the American people viewed as contempt for their concerns about illegal immigration, particularly over the last 4 years. They felt like their political leaders were laughing in their face as they imported millions of illegal immigrants and seemingly didn't care about the consequences, didn't care about housing shortages, apparently didn't care about illegal immigrant crime because they didn't cooperate with ICE and allow the jails to release people who had committed crimes. Joe Biden failing to say Laken Riley's name properly at the State of the Union, never calling Patty Morin, the mother of Rachel Morin, or Jocelyn Nungary's mother. I think the American people felt disrespected, and so this is a celebratory moment for them that they have political leaders who are willing to take this seriously.
But do you think that the seriousness of those things that you have just reflected, like crimes and murders committed by people, do you think that it is reflective of the kind of gravity and of those situations to be going around chuckling about like maybe Alaska can use bears or selling Alligator Alcatraz merch? I mean, that just seems to me to be actually trivializing a issue that you rightly say is serious.
I think it's poking fun at the apoplectic reaction to a detention facility being built from the left.
But I mean, the reason that Trump is glorying in this particular immigration facility is the idea that, maybe we can teach them how to run away from alligators. Like, that is by its nature making light of a situation rather than reflecting its seriousness.
Is it really a situation that could even happen with some non-zero percentage that someone is going to escape from this facility and be running through the Everglades? Like, the concept is funny because it's so surreal, because it's not going to happen. This is a secure facility. And by the way, hugely efficient. They managed to put up 3,000 beds in 8 days. And not only that, but it also couples transportation for removals because of the fact that this was built next to an abandoned airstrip. So I think this is a marvel of quick American engineering, of the ability to consolidate both detentions and removals at one location on the eastern seaboard. And it's worth celebrating.
Yeah, I mean, with all due respect, it seems to me that you're slightly trying to have it both ways there, because you're saying on one hand, this is so secure, nobody will ever escape. And you're also saying the fact that the Trump's comments about the alligators are ludicrous because it will never happen. The alligators are things that he is presenting as, in the general sense, part of the security. People won't escape because they'll get eaten by alligators. This is just, to my mind, part of a rhetoric that seeks to ridicule people, actually, and ridicule a situation that is serious. And yes, there is a legitimate case to be made for harsher action regarding people who are in the country illegally in terms of, for example, tightening employment safeguards and so on and so forth. We have seen Trump trying to flit around all over the place in terms of people who work on farms and the hospitality industry as to what he's going to do there. But to have people in the government tweeting photos of alligators in ice caps, like, you really don't think that that is undignified?
No, I think it's funny.
Okay, well, we just disagree on that. President Trump got his settlement with Paramount, but without one big item on his wish list. We'll discuss that next.
Free, free! Free, free! Free, free! Free, free!
That was British punk rap duo Bob Vylan expressing their support for Palestinians at Glastonbury, Britain's biggest music festival.
Bob Vylan further led the crowd in a chant of "Death, death to the IDF," referring to Israel's military, the Israel Defense Forces. The Trump administration sent a strong message against the band's inflammatory remarks by revoking their U.S. visas. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau wrote on X, "The State Department has revoked the U.S. visas for the members of the Bob Vylan band in light of their hateful tirade at Glastonbury, including leading the crowd in death chants. Foreigners who glorify violence and hatred are not welcome visitors to our country."
Bobby Vylan, one of the performers, defended his remarks in an Instagram post on Sunday that was captioned, "I said what I said." Vylan wrote in his post in part, "Teaching our children to speak up for the change they want and need is the only way that we make this world a better place. Let us display to them, loudly and visibly, the right thing to do when we want change and need change."
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer condemned the chants at Glastonbury, saying there is no excuse for this kind of appalling hate speech. The BBC also apologized for continuing to live stream the performance after the remarks.
I would say I think that the outrage about this is kind of overdone. I know it is quite widespread. I don't personally, look, it's not something that I would go around chanting. It's an inflammatory thing to chant. It's directed at the Israeli military. There are obviously lots of reasons to be extremely critical of the conduct of the Israeli military, which has killed about 56,000 people since October 7th. And look, as far as Mr. Villain and what he chanted there, the distinction that, he is making that chant and getting vilified for it and has no real political power, has some pop culture influence perhaps, while there are people in the Israeli government who are showing no inclination to even remotely differentiate between civilians and combatants, who, in the case of Itamar Ben-Gvir, the National Security Minister, has talked about Palestinian prisoners should be shot in the head, that food stores in Gaza should be bombed. Yoav Gallant, the former defense minister, is with Mr. Netanyahu charged with war crimes, partly because at the outset of the conflict he talked about we are fighting human animals and will act accordingly. Netanyahu, his arrest warrant stresses the idea that he allegedly intentionally directed an attack against a civilian population and used starvation as a method of warfare. So, look, it's not the kind of thing I would chant, but there are much bigger things to be outraged about in that conflict, in my opinion. I
have no problem with revoking this guy's visa. If you're chanting death to anyone, then I don't think you should get a free pass to come to the United States. This band was supposed to come and perform in November, including in Washington, D.C. Look, if he had even said, end the IDF, I think we'd be having a different conversation right now. And even in his comments from the stage, he said, quote, sometimes we have to get our message across with violence because that's the only language some people speak, unfortunately. So I don't want this person in the United States. I think you could make probably the same argument about the U.S. military and service members, right? If you're going back to the acceptance of torture, for example, someone would maybe be justified in chanting death to people who tortured people at Guantanamo or in the service of the war in Afghanistan. But would we accept them saying death to the U.S. military or death to veterans? I think that he has undoubtedly crossed the line.
In relation to the State Department order, the State Department can do more or less, well, I was going to say can do whatever it likes. It can't do whatever it likes in all circumstances, obviously, but they can revoke a visa, and I think you can make the argument that this is sufficiently inflammatory. One thing that gets lost in all of this is it is very well established under international law that people who live under military occupation have a right to resist that occupation. Israel has illegally occupied the West Bank for decades and has been the effective occupying authority in Gaza for a very long time through blockades and the abrogation of various rights that would obtain to any free society. So I am less outraged, I think, than many people are by what he said, and I think that that right is too often overlooked in these discussions.
Yeah, I suppose the problem there, or the distinction there, is that he's not living under occupation, right? He's a bystander, he's an observer from Britain. So him encouraging people to engage in violence, the crowd that he's speaking to are people who are not living under occupation. And so he's sharing these violent, inflammatory remarks with a crowd that he is intentionally trying to rile up, as he says, to speak violence because nobody else, his people won't understand a different language. I think it's pretty insane if you want my true opinion, and I'm glad he's not coming to the U.S.
I think we just fundamentally see the conflict through different lenses and therefore see the rhetoric around it through different lenses. Look, I'm not saying like that's a great thing to chant, like it's not something I would chant. It's not something that I think is all that helpful. But when you look at, there was an Israeli columnist for the Haaretz newspaper just on Sunday, Gideon Levi, talking about the horrendous scenes that we've seen at these food lines. And Levi, writing, as I say, for an Israeli news organization, notes that at least 549 people have been killed while waiting for food on the ostensible justification of maintaining order and just killing starving people. So look, among the rankings of things to get outraged about in the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, I think what some rapper chants at Glastonbury is pretty low down.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm outraged about it. I just
you
don't want him to have a visa. Yeah.
That's certainly a legitimate view to hold.
He can say what he wants. And look, actually, I think the song kind of catchy. The performance was well done.
Sure.
But I thought it was insane.
Well, fair enough. We have differing views on that. Maybe we'll have the same views on whether we are proud or not to be an American. The father of the anthem, God Bless the USA, Lee Greenwood, might shutter this next story. We'll tell you why next.
Alligator Alcatraz, Gator Gitmo. There's no shortage of school-grade-like puns about Immigration and Customs Enforcement's latest stunt. The Department of Homeland Security took to X Saturday, posting what appears to be a joke, an AI-generated picture of 4 alligators sporting ice baseball caps lined up outside a prison with the caption reading, "Coming soon."
The post comes on the heels of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' proposal to open up a migrant detention facility in the state's alligator-infested Everglades. A remote airstrip would be turned into the new detention center. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem corroborated the reports of the facility that would be funded through FEMA's Shelter Services Program. The so-called Alligator Alcatraz would cost $450 million.
Joke or not, outside of MAGA world, the plan drew backlash. Hundreds of protesters converged on the highway leading to the airfield as dump trucks hauling materials to the site drove past. In response to DHS's Alligator Alcatraz, podcaster Ryan Sheed posted, quote, "We've officially reached the concentration camp part of the Trump presidency, and we're only 159 days in."
Meanwhile, MAGA praised the plan, with right-wing commentator Nick Sortor posting, quote, "Illegals are going from the lush Roosevelt Hotel in New York City to a detention center surrounded by gators. That's what we voted for." What do you think about Alligator Alcatraz?
Well, first, a couple things here. We got a comment on their social media manager. This was obviously a complete miss on their part.
I think it's hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, look, I get people trying, like, I'm all for making politics fun. That's a big thing I'm trying to do right now. But this is a very serious topic where people are getting snatched from their schools, snatched from Home Depots. And I think this is a human rights issue, and I think it was a complete miss on the part of the social media manager. Now, to get a little bit more into the substance of this, I think, one, we need more processing centers, not more detention centers.
I totally disagree.
I think that when you have that, we do have, now I'll give Trump credit. I'm coming from the perspective of someone who wants to prevent and stop illegal immigration. And I'll give Trump credit for decreasing that significantly over the last 6 months. It needs to be done humanely. That's where I'm not sure I'm totally on board with everything the Trump administration does. But one of the main issues that we've seen, especially at the border, is that people who are seeking asylum, for example, will then have to wait months, in some cases years, before they can get a proper hearing. So I'm all for more resources so we can have more processing facilities. I think when you look at, these, obviously the social media managers making a comparison to Guantanamo Bay, not a great part of America's record, our human rights record. Guantanamo Bay was used for what they called enhanced interrogation techniques, which was code for torture. Those are things that do not put America on a high moral footing, and according to national security analysts, there was not significant intelligence that they got from using those tactics. Now, at this Alligator Alcatraz, or whatever they want to call it.
I don't think they came up with that term, though. Wasn't it critics of the plan that came up with those terms?
That I'm not sure about. The first time I saw it was on the social media post.
Right, because they were sort of poking fun at the critics of comparing it to these things. So that's where I think it was funny, because they were kind of trying to take the air out of this sort of overwrought backlash to what is just a detention facility, which we already have dozens of at the southern border, right? They're typically run by either DHS or HHS if they're for kids. This is just more space to help process people as they're on their way out of the country. People keep calling for more due process. This is how you get it. You have the ability to hold someone while you determine that they are who you say they are, that they are in the country illegally, before they get returned back to their home country. And I think, it is an important distinction, too, between immigration judges and processing centers. Those are two different things. And unfortunately, what we saw during the first Trump administration in 2019, when we looked into the asylum numbers, was that only about 10% of people who were claiming asylum were getting it. So I think the answer is not necessarily more processing of people or allowing people to make more asylum claims, certainly to take the ones that are there and get them done faster so people don't wait years either in a detention facility, or if it was under Joe Biden, they would have an ankle monitor and go somewhere into the U.S. But I think we should actually tighten the asylum restrictions. No more can you cross the border illegally, and then if you're caught by a Border Patrol official, you get to throw your hands up and say, no, I'm claiming asylum, even though you didn't go to a processing facility or you didn't claim in a safe third country like the law requires, and then getting released into the U.S. You have to do it the proper way. And sure, more immigration judges, great, but in terms of the processing, I really think that is not the major problem that we have.
Well, I've worked directly with human rights activists who have sought asylum in our country. This is a very thorough process. As someone who's helped sign off on some of those papers for people.
I agree the process is thorough, but the problem is that a lot of people take advantage of the asylum claim because they know it takes so long to go to a judge's courtroom, that they believe that they'll get to be able to be released into the U.S. while they wait for that court date. And Trump is saying, no, if you have a legitimate asylum claim, then you can make it the proper way through a port of entry or by submitting your claim from safe third country. But we're no longer going to do the thing where we release you into the United States and you get to live 3-4 years here before you go into a courtroom.
We agree on more immigration judges. Now, with this story, why in the Everglades? Why in this pretty rural part of the state? I know that Ron DeSantis, I guess, is trying to sort of get back into the national spotlight and say, we're going to take this on. $450 million of taxpayer funding. I know Florida is fronting the cost, but he's expecting to get reimbursed by the federal government. So that's our taxpayer dollars. And I understand this thing's already moving forward. So now the next thing to really watch for are, what are the conditions there? I think as the United States, we need to treat people humanely. I disagree with this place being built in the first place, but if it is going to be built, if they are going to be having people there, do they have access to food, or do they have access to basic necessities, or are they going to be treated like animals? Because an immigration system that dehumanizes people is not something that is morally right, obviously, but it's something that's also not strategic for the United States over the long term.
Yeah, I think we agree that people should have access to food, but I guess the question would be, is there any evidence that they won't have access to food, or is it just speculation?
Well, some of the facilities we saw on the southern border in Texas were not humane, so we'll see what happens with this.
All right. Up next, big reveal from President Trump, who says he's found buyers for TikTok. We'll tell you more.